Okay, I now see we have like 32 audience online. So, hi. I don't know where you are from. Maybe most of you are from Taiwan. And well, we just had a huge thunderstorm late in the afternoon. It's clearing out, so pretty peaceful right now. I am glad that you decided to join this, live stream online instead of going out, so you didn't get drenched. I think that's the merit of um, having a live stream online at home, so that we can all avoid a huge thunderstorm in the afternoon, which is like a typical um, summer weather in Asia. Um, yeah, okay. So that's 2 minutes, and we have 44 people online, and we have 45 people online. I feel like I'm like one of those astrologers, like waiting for people to joining and starting to disclose your destiny for the next week. Um, yeah, but again, welcome. And we're really excited to present this panel because we have been working on it for a while. And this is such a pressing topic that we have to speak about. Um, um, Yesterday we had opening at MoCA. It was my first opening during this pandemic, and also like after we all were like the third degree for the alarm in Taiwan. It was like my first opening, and it was really nice actually, rather peaceful. Not a lot of people, not a lot of drinking and like eating happening. So yeah, so that it was peaceful actually. So I kind of enjoyed it because I didn't have that much pressure of wanting to have many people to come, So I guess that's like get rid of this like KPI pressure actually makes me feel much happier. And also I feel more freely to engage with people who were there and talk about the exhibition instead of like trying to network. And that's so I really enjoyed the opening yesterday. And a lot of the reporters and critics came at the opening. I think some of them interviewed Muskiki, and also Muskiki shared with us his artist note, which was really nice. And I'm sure that people are super intrigued by the process of your creation and how you make this artwork, and also this artistic research that you do. So yeah, I think today is what an opportunity to share your process with with the online audience who couldn't make it yesterday, and probably will be making it, until the future. The exhibition is open until September, so you have plenty of time to make like your booking in advance and sign up the sheets before you plan your visit to Taipei Museum of Contemporary Art. It's lovely, not so many people, so it's actually rather wonderful museum viewing experience. And also they have really nice couch there. I have to mention, I definitely recommend to anyone. So yeah, take your time and go there to see the exhibition. Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be lovely. So again, I think, let me check how many people now. Okay, 50 people. I think that's a great number to start. So again, hello and everyone. My name is Yen Yi Lee, the curator of There Are Lights That Never Go Out, 总是春光乍现 exhibition, which is Muskiki's solo exhibition in Museum of Contemporary Art, Taipei. So that was what we just had our opening yesterday. So I was kind of sharing with our earlier viewers about what happened yesterday, hoping to give everyone a little bit of like a radio or broadcasting preview of the show. And so now I'm going to introduce our panel today. That this is the panel that me and Muskiki, we've been working for a while. And during this process, we actually, this is something that I've been researching on, and finally have this excuse. Thanks to Ms. Kiki for this invitation. Finally have this this opportunity to really go in depth and reach out to different people that I've been really interested in, wanting to reach out to and wanted to make connection with, in terms of exchanging thoughts and comments, and also criticism towards what we are as a society right now. So this panel is called Light and Blackness, Point Out the Bias in Visual Culture. For many of you who may know me, that in last year, 2020, in the Taipei Digital Art Festival, I hosted a panel that was with two art practitioners. One is curator, the other one is a teacher, an art teacher, a meaty man, and the curator is Xu. We talked about the algorithm bias against female, against women, actually. So on that note, later on, we discovered that there are actually a much more severe problem that exists in the current system, and also the data that we use to fuel the algorithm. So I wanted to introduce a little bit about Muskiki's exhibition and the relationship with this panel. The panel is correlated to Muskiki Zhiying's exhibition, There Are Lights That Never Goes Out, as a parallel event to open up more discussion on Blackness, discrimination, algorithm bias, and Africa-Asia relationship in the realms of visual culture. In this exhibition, he examines the history of photography, the material of the film in 底片, and series of movie-making infrastructure that was systematically developed into a way that is difficult to see Black actors' skin. As the technology of photography enters the digital age, the phenomenon not only failed to resolve such problem, but further accelerate and scale to, and also having an immense impact when algorithm and facial recognition system are deployed globally. So now the biggest cell phone company in many African countries are owned by Chinese companies. And the algorithm system was actually developed by a Taiwanese tech company, Lianfake. And so we think this is the time to bring more awareness and discussion on technology and bias. So right now I'm going to introduce our speakers today. And I hope that to let the audience know that this talk is will be conducted in English, and I'll be making comments as a translation on the comment section, and a lot of questions that you may have during this this panel. Please follow the instruction on the Facebook page and see where you can raise the question, or at the end of the panel discussion, we do save like 20 or 15 minutes for the audience to raise your questions. So firstly, I would like to briefly introduce our speakers today. So first, Zhiying, Muskiki Zhiying. He is the artist of this exhibition. You can see him on the top of the screen, I think top right. If we're all seeing the same screen, please wave. Yeah, that's a great wave. And then I would like to introduce Liu Wen. She is a social psychologist, assistant research fellow at the Institution of Anthropology, Academia Sinica. And then, last but not least, Christopher Whitfield. He's an art critic and also the co-founder of Taipei Is Listening. So welcome, speakers. I'm so thrilled to have you here. And later on, they'll be doing a little bit of an introduction about themselves, and which I'm super excited to learn about. And firstly, we will have Muskiki Zhiying to give us a broad review, and also like maybe actually in like a detail of how you proceed this artistic research. And yeah, we wanted to know more about your work. So bring on. Welcome, Zhiying.
Thank you very much, Yen Yi, for having this lovely introduction of our event. I also want to thanks MoCA Taipei for hosting this lovely event, and everybody are working very hard for today. And I'm really happy to have this conversation with Liu Wen and Christopher. And I also personally have a lot of questions I would like to ask later on, because me myself is more like I define myself as a art worker, so it's not necessary have to be someone who are good with academic research. So many things in my brand, I have some instinction to catch it, but can't really develop them with structural mind map, with like history or sociology research. So, for example, like what really in the recent year, what really confused me is that like the topic today, when we mention about blackness, I can't really find a translation in Mandarin for this. We can't just say, we can't translate this directly into 黑人性, which is a not invent, but like developed by Amin Cesar. It should be translated into negritude. Negritude is another word. And it's not only color. Blackness is not color. It's something developed with a long history, maybe start from, I don't know, I would say maybe firstly developed by W.D. Du Bois, maybe around 100 years ago, firstly, and then with a lot of activists and also academia slowly make it the meaning of this blackness become richer. And I think at this point, to think about this is especially important for us, because I also see clearly in the recent year the lackness of understanding the blackness in Asia, especially in Taiwan, result in a lot of problem. So the exhibition this time in MoCA Taipei, and also the cooperation with Yen Yi, Liu Wen, and Christopher, we want to start some question, or at least start some discussion about this topic. Also in response to the global movement at the moment. I would like to introduce firstly two of the works I present this time in the museum. And I will share my screen. I made some PowerPoint with you. Yes, the non-stop looping. And now is I share with you some PowerPoint I made. Yes, so in the museum this time, MoCA Taipei, I present mainly two video works. One is called the lighting, 打光. The second one is called the conflu. I will introduce you firstly the lighting, and then make a connection to some behind ideas or reason how I developed the second work, the conflu. So firstly, I would say all my research of the video work start from this photograph, which I shot, I think, around 2018 in Togo, West Africa. It's a little country. Normally people say Togo is a little country, but still bigger than Taiwan. And so basically, for the people who not know well about my practice, I would just quickly introduce. I define myself as a film and documentary filmmaker. However, always before the production, I will launch a very long research. And the reason I went to Togo was actually for another production, another research. But during this research trip, I realized that in Togo, everywhere I can see this cell phone advertisement called Techno. As you can see in the middle of the screen, it's just the random advertisement on the street, and they show you this Techno advertisement. And nearby, you can also see another cell phone called Etel. Etel is also part of Techno company, so they are actually same company. And then later on, I realized Techno phone is the mainstream cell phone which be used in the whole African continent. And this cell phone is only sold in the African continent. At least till the recent years, still like this. But I heard that they are aiming to also sell their products in the other area. And this company is owned by a Chinese technology company called Transsion. It's based in Shenzhen. And you can see in the image, I will show you another, this one you can see already on the advertisement, how they present their phone is they can make their selfie photograph. You can have a brighter skin in your photograph. So they compare the original photo and the photo in the camera, and you can see the face looks brighter. I will show you a second advertisement I collected. It's more clearly. So on the title, it says like how the company become a king of the Africa. So it means that this phone actually is the most used cell phone in African continent in general. And also in the advertisement, they also show you that the phone can make your skin looks brighter. It was always be featured in their advertisement, and this fact attract me to think deeper why this special function should be always mentioned, especially even in the center of the advertisement. And later on, with my further research, I realized this algorithm, the algorithm which allowed the cell phone to make people's skin looks brighter, is developed by a Taiwanese technology company called MediaTek. It's located in Hsinchu in Taiwan. Yeah. So here I also collect some image about the MediaTek from internet. So basically this company, they are fabless, which means is they provide technique or solution for the other production company. So they only focus on technique or software. And very interesting thing is that this algorithm, so after I interviewed the engineer there, so they told me that what very important is how to teach algorithm to see the figure is the main solution they have to solve in a camera. So before, you can imagine maybe 6-7 years ago, actually our smartphone's camera cannot really capture where the face is, at least not as sensitive as today, which means it's they call that computational vision or computational photograph, which means like how computers see the image or how computer basically see everything. And that really needs a lot of database or image archive allowed an algorithm to learn how to see. And the reason why a few years ago, most smartphone camera except Techno phone, why a few years ago they couldn't see darker skin face or darker skins people was because there was not enough image database which help or teach computer to learn how to see. So basically what MediaTek did was to establish their own database or archive, image archive, about darker skin face or people, so that to let the algorithm learn how to see darker skin. You can imagine like training an algorithm is just like how human being learning. So we also don't know everything when we were young, and we learn things mostly through our experience, and mainly through visual. So we see many things, and we learn what things should be, or at least how the things looks like. So the reason why the algorithm couldn't see the darker skin was the lack of experience. So you can understand in this way, they couldn't recognize where is the darker skin human. And this is the technology which be developed in the 2000, around 18 and 19. But I want to drop a little bit back to the 70s, because I realized this question of the image or visual bias it's not only happen today. So if you research a little bit more about the image history, or I would say image production history, if we go back to the 1970s, there was a kind of famous event, or I would say a famous sentence which was spoken by the famous filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard. So when Jean-Luc Godard went to Mozambique in Africa, he was invited by the government, by the new established communism government, to establish their propaganda film institution. But when Godard arrived in Mozambique, he realized all the Kodak film. So during the time, the main material which used for filming was Kodak film. It's an analog film. The most film he brought, Kodak film, couldn't use in Mozambique. The reason is when I can't say it couldn't use, so it can film, but basically all the figure in Mozambique with darker skin are facing a problem of too little light. So basically the whole figure become totally dark. You can't exposure at the right light degree. So Godard had this famous sentence that the Kodak film he brought are racism. So he pointed out the film itself has some kind of with this term which we normally use for human being. He called the film is a racism. And why the film was racism? The reason was that when Kodak, the company, 柯达公司 Kodak, developed their film from the 50s until 90s, they used so-called Shelley card as their color correction standard. You can see in the screen now, these are just some sample of the early Shelley card. The Shelley card, why it's called Shelley, it was a rumor. Nobody can really make sure the reason, but it was a rumor that at the beginning, the first model who was showed by the Kodak standard color card was named after Shelley. And afterwards, all these cards are all be called Shelley card. And the models are all called Shelley girls. And you can already clearly see that Shelley card it's only feature we call white skin or brighter skin Western female. So, which means from the 50 until the 90s, all the film which we use in a whole world, which developed by Kodak, are all used white female as the color standard. And that was the reason which result in the problem of the exposure of the film during the time. And of course, these things already be discussed in photography or in image history. And these things have to be, this thing only until 90s during the Olympic game, like now. Finally, Kodak Film Company released a new film products called True Colors. And these True Colors, finally, why it's called True Color? It just want to rise the problem like what they couldn't do before. And now, finally, their film can show the audience true colors. And they also intentionally use either darker skin figure, or you can see on the right-hand side, they intentionally use Asian or African American model for their so-called Shelley card. So we can see this problem of this image bias. It's not only appeared today in our smartphone, but also appeared before, from the 50s. And so I would say I want to connect these two things. There is no so the problem is not generated by the technology. The problem is something behind the technology's development. I can say it's somebody who created this technology that put his or her own prejudice into the technology. That's why the machine can't see the figure clearly. And here I just want to also mention one thing. It's not directly related to my exhibition this time, but I would say maybe people will be also interested in this important image in the image history, which is the Lena image. Some of you might know already the Lena image. So this is the it's also happened in the 70s, but during the 70s was also the beginning of the digital image development. Of course, people were trying to use digital signal to create the image, but of course, the technique was not strong enough to really develop camera. But anyway, so the early standard image for the digital image was also a white female model called Lena. And this image was actually originally from a Playboy in 1972. And why Playboy image become a standard of the digital image was by some report. They say because in the laboratory where they were finishing their image research report, they were urgently searching for an image for their thesis, their essay. And then there were only one magazine in their laboratory. So that's why they use this Lena. They just quickly copy this image from the Playboy and put it for their essay, used for their essay. And it's something I think also relate why always female, right? Why always white female become the standard? And some people also say because who develop all these techniques are like maybe they are mainly male, and they are like who interesting, I don't know, who only collect this kind of image. That's why they project their own desire, and that's why it happened like this. But anyway, I just want to also mention this image in the film, in the image production history. I want to back to the work I'm developing about the lighting. So I went to a MediaTek and interviewed the engineer who developed the algorithm which be used by Technophone. And the engineer, his name is called Wang Shufan, so Dr. Wang. He's a leader of the algorithm image visual computational visual image department. And then he kind of find out the solution for computer how to see the darker skin figure. And you can see that actually I couldn't bring the camera into MediaTek. So the whole MediaTek is not allowed to bring in any camera because probably there are a lot of secret inside. So we actually did the interview outside of MediaTek in a library nearby. And Wang Shufan, the Dr. Wang, he introduced me and explained how they developed the algorithm behind the Technophone, behind the whole thing. And you can see the result in our work, the lighting in the museum in MoCA. And beside this, I also bought an old Kodak film. It's called Ektachrome. It was the mainstream material which was used during 50s, 60s, and 70s. And Ektachrome is one of the most important symbol during the filmmaking in the history. And this is so famous that it was not produced for a while after the True Color released, but started to release recently because it provides a very dense and very vivid, not vivid, but like a very situated color, as you can see in the image. This is an image we produce Kung Fu film in our work, the lighting. We try to use this old technique, 60mm film, to kind of show how the image looks like and why it was problematic. And this film, why we made this film, why we made Kung Fu film in the lighting was, this film was actually inspired by, I can give you a comparison here. This film is inspired by a Bruce Lee film in the 73, also during the 70s, called Enter the Dragon, 龙争虎斗, Enter the Dragon. And in the image, you can see there was this famous martial artist, James Kelly, Jim Kelly, who act as a Kung Fu master in the film. And we use this scene as our example to reproduce our own Kung Fu film with the old 60mm Kodak film. And why I especially pick up this picture and use this scene as our sample was because I would say in the 70s, actually till 90s, Hong Kong was always the epicenter of the film production in Asia. Hong Kong was very strong in the film production. And especially in the 70s, their Kung Fu film was kind of the mainstream product which attract the most audience during the time. So for the younger audience here, if you ask your parents or your grandparents, they might all experience this 70 times with all these Hong Kong produced Kung Fu film. So I want to compare this during the 70s when all these things happened, but I use the Asian film genre as an example in our film. And for the people who like Bruce Lee film, you must know that Bruce Lee, he used to work a lot with different black actors. Like his last film, The Gang of Death in 1978, he worked with the NBA superstar Abdul Jabbar. It's actually Abdul Jabbar was actually Bruce Lee's student, and Bruce Lee invited him to act as the main enemy in his last film. So, since we talk about Kung Fu and film now, I want to just quickly jump to my next project, and then in the end come back to summarize why all this work and how all this work connect to each other. So you can see this Bruce Lee Kung Fu film was so popular that not only in Asia, but in a worldwidely, in a global scale, Kung Fu and Asia, an Asian body dressed in yellow become kind of a popular symbol around the world. And that gave me this idea, like inspired me. The second work I developed is called Kung Flu. So here I show you, this is a second video we also show in the museum, MoCA Taipei. It's called Kung Flu, 功夫流感 in Mandarin, the Kung Flu. And for the younger audience today, I want to show you, compare nearby my image on the right-hand side is this old footage from the Karate Kids from 1984. So it was another reference for me for my costume. So the Karate Kids was also very popular. It was in the 80s, and it was always reproduced. And today, even today, the Netflix also have their new kind of new series on Netflix. Talk about how these kids grow up and the later on story. But we don't go deeper into that. So the Karate Kids was also one of the films which might make the Western society to connect Kung Fu and Asia, because in the Karate Kids that there was a Japanese Kung Fu master or karate master who teach the main character karate. But back to the topic, the Kung Flu. What is Kung Flu actually? The Kung Flu is invented by the Donald Trump during his president campaign last year. So during his speech, I don't know why, maybe some people who are familiar with Donald Trump, you might know the reason, but I don't know why. Anyway, during the speech, I think he wants to make a joke, or it's kind of his humor. He wants to teasing the fact that the virus is from China. So he combined two words, Kung Fu and flu. So Kung Fu 和流感. He combined these two words into one word called Kung Flu. And I pick up these words because I think it's kind of present a very clear idea how, in general, how public connect Kung Fu and Asian, or Chinese or Asian in general, with these two things, and even use it as a way of showing the humor. And I think it's very interesting for me in a way that, because especially in Taiwan, who actually know Kung Fu. Not everybody, not like what people might imagine in Asia, everybody can do Kung Fu, right? So But anyway, for this project, I actually really went to learn Kung Fu, but just one class. So when I was in Berlin, I went to learn Jeet Kune Do. Jeet Kune Do is the Kung Fu philosophy developed by Bruce Lee. It's very interesting because Jeet Kune Do is not about one technique. Jeet Kune Do is more likely most closer or more similar to a way of thinking or philosophy. So with Jeet Kune Do, you actually mix all kind of technique from different martial arts. So you can imagine Jeet Kune Do is a way of combine or collage all different kind of kung fu. And for example, my shifu, my master, Mohammed Khobt, he is from Egypt. He was training the Egyptian army when he was younger. So you see, like, it's a show that actually not only Asian or not only Hong Kongese know about Jeet Kune Do, but it's a way of training your body, a way of getting stronger, a way of sport worldwide. So I want to back to this image again, that this image is still very interesting me. We already talked about this image before, but I want to bring back to this image with Kung Flu. And because this prejudice of Asian and Kung Fu is so strong that I think in many mass media or like film production in the Western, you can very easily see like Asian who is good at Kung Fu. For example, you also know like a Jackie Chan film, Rush Hours. There's like tons of examples. And about Bruce Lee, I think maybe he was unconsciously, or maybe he was intentional. I can see clearly that Bruce Lee intentionally put yellow and martial arts also on different kind of characters. Like here, you can see James Kelly, he dressed in yellow, but also doing very well Kung Fu. And especially you can see the audience behind. They were maybe Hong Kongese or Chinese. They are seeing how Kelly show the way how Kung Fu goes. So either or whether the Bruce Lee knew or intentionally or not, I can see this interesting technique of reverse some prejudice about Kung Fu in his film. I want to mention this image because that after Bruce Lee in the 70s, even until 80s and 90s, the other film produced in Hong Kong, they don't really share this kind of I would say this kind of way of seeing a black body in a way. I want to bring a kind of a very legendary example. Again, sorry, today is always showing my age, but I can also quickly explain this film. Maybe some young audience don't know. This is called African series in Hong Kong. They produce a lot of film with this Namibia actor called Li Su in Mandarin. Li Su. And his original name, I'm really sorry, I can't really pronounce. But in Mandarin, we call him Li Su. He became a very famous actor in Hong Kong and also in Taiwan. He's originally from another film called The God Must Be Crazy. And he got attention. Afterwards, Asian film production and industry invite him to produce even more Hong Kong film during the time. On the left-hand side, you can see Crazy Hong Kong, 香港也疯狂 in 1993. On the right-hand side, you can see Crazy Safari. In Mandarin, actually called 非洲和尚 in 1991. And this image, I want to show that doesn't matter which film or wherever he goes, they always project Li Su as a person who is from, I would say, so-called like primitive tribes or safari and come to the modern city in Hong Kong and interact with the other people. So they want to kind of project this image, or I would say because these were all comedies, so they want to make humor out of the image which project Li Su, the actor, as how this they want to play this humor between primitive culture when the primitive culture encounter the modern culture in Hong Kong. I guess it was the idea they were thinking, and that's why they brought this figure into their film production. But of course, when we come back again to see this film today, I think there is some problem here. And I want to mention another film, not film, but advertisement from the 90s Taiwan production. It's Wei Dali Vitaly Soda advertisement. I think maybe even today you can see on television. It's so popular, so famous that the company Wei Dali, it doesn't even want to change this. They just want to use this advertisement even till today. So in the advertisement, you can see there is a Congolese actor called Ivan Lufana, who is in a conversation with a Taiwanese actor, Cai Zhennan. And here, you don't really see what's happened, but anyway, in this advertisement, for the people who didn't see, I will just briefly introduce. In this advertisement, they want to project Ivan, the actor on the left-hand side, cannot speak Chinese well, and that's why they generate a lot of humor from this speaking language. But in fact, Ivan, his Mandarin is super good. He's like even have Beijing accent. So I would say in this advertisement, they want to project a black actor into some kind of a lower position in the society, or from the power structure in the lower position, and use this as a way to generate humor. So again, I would say from today, when we review this image, there is some problem there. I'll quickly give some more example, especially in Taiwan, which I always mention in the class, with friends, in the workshop. In Taiwan, we have tons of examples which use some kind of technique to generate humor, like painting blackface. On the right-hand side, you can see this is a famous YouTuber who painted their face black. I think it was produced last year. And also the left-hand side, you can see the famous internet meme, which I guess also used in China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, or every Mandarin-speaking area. They say 黑人问号 black man question mark in English, black man question mark, to express something that so difficult to comprehensive or so difficult to understand. They use this term black man question mark, want to exaggerate how difficult to understand. And it became a very popular phrase even in a daily talking in Taiwan. And of course, the famous example, Dali toothpaste, 黑人牙膏. So you can see there are a lot of same this why I want to ask him why Taiwan or in Asia in general or Mandarin speaking area keep reproduce this image and keep want to produce image through this technique of humor. And this was generated at the beginning by the thinking of this Kung Flu. So my question was that when the mass media want to combine the Kung Fu and the yellow body with Asian, but in Asia, simultaneously, we also reproduce a lot of, I would say, problematic image in a daily life. I use this image as end of my presentation because later we have two very great speakers, Liu Wen and Christopher. They can go deeper into a lot of academic thinking towards the question of the race or the history of the blackness and black study. That will help us a lot to understand the topic better. And the end of my presentation, I want to quickly share with you some experience I learned from Kung Fu. It's nothing to do anything before directly, but I think there's some connection. So when you talk about Bruce Lee, Kung Fu or Jeet Kune Do, you always remember this phrase, this sentence called "Be water, my friends," right? So most people you understand "Be water, my friend" as the philosophy of Bruce Lee, and it literally people normally answer the "Be water, my friend" as a phrase that try to change your shape into different container to try to be soft. And I think that's a good way to explain this sentence. But when I was learning in Jeet Kune Do, the Shifu, my master, Muhammad, he also told me something deeper inside this sentence, "Be water, my friend," meaning is that when you encounter an attack from the others, not only be soft, but the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do is you should react, you should create your attack inside your enemy's attack. That's actually the main ideology or main philosophy of the Jeet Kune Do. So it's not only about being soft or different shape, but being strong in a way that create your anti-reaction inside the attack from your enemy or from your counter-strike. And that remind me the other books I've been reading recently is called Anti-Fragile. So Anti-Fragile is an economic book which written by Nicholas Taleb. Recently, he defined everything into three things, which is weak, strong, but he thinks there's something. So normally we define something is weak, something is strong, but he thinks actually the opposite of the weak is not about strong. It's called anti-fragile. So anti-fragile is the idea that when you be attacked by the other things, you are not only being strong, but you grow, you become stronger. This is called anti-fragile. And he gave a very good example is like our muscle. So our muscle, when we training a lot, we got hurt, but afterwards, our muscle actually become stronger. So this anti-fragile is stronger than strong itself. And I think it will be a very good philosophy adopt into our practice, not only for artists, but in general for our life. Thank you very much. My presentation is due now. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Muskiki. I can see that we're having a lot of audience now, and I'm really happy about that. So I wanted to take this time and to introduce our next speaker, Christopher Whitfield. Maybe you can start. You can respond to Ms. Kiki's talk earlier, and also his artwork. And also, we also very looking forward to hear from you and from your perspective and your research. Thank you.
Okay. Hello. My name's Christopher Whitfield. First of all, I guess I'd like to thank MoCA, Yen Yi, and Ms. Kiki for inviting me. And also thank Yen Yi for the hard work of translating so that I am able to participate with you guys today. And I'd also like to thank my collaborator, Teruo Kadare, who kind of has helped me with some of the work that I'm going to show to you today, and also kind of helped me develop some of the ideas that I'll be talking about. Do we have the slideshow? Cool. Yeah, so I am an art critic based in Taipei, but actually I'm currently in the UK, and it's way earlier than I usually function, so you have to forgive me if I am slow or something like that. Yeah, so I'm an art critic based in Taipei, but over the past year in 2020, I have also kind of been called upon to take up the role of activist in that community as well, kind of surrounding issues related to the kind of global Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm kind of going to use that experience as a framework to kind of propose or introduce some alternative or broader ideas about how we can look at images of Blackness and the way that they're circulated within Black communities globally and also locally to us in Taipei. So on the first slide, so this is the work that we did in Taipei. This is Taipei Is Listening. So Taipei Is Listening was kind of initiated as an emergency response to the global discourse that was erupting around the murder of George Floyd in 2020. I don't know who I'm talking to or who's watching, so I don't know if you were there or if you're aware of that work, but it was kind of like a large scale gathering that we planned that kind of had an unprecedented amount of participants show up, in which we tried to facilitate conversation in certain ways. So the event was organized around what we called community context breakout groups, meaning that we tried to organize the discussion so that it was happening between members of similar demographics or who shared community with each other to talk about how they recognized and responded to or failed to respond to instances of anti-Black racism within their own communities. And we did this purposefully because as a group of Black organizers, I organized it along with Teruo Kadare and Ali George. As a group of Black organizers, we thought that it was most pertinent that we localized the conversation and had these, and kind of inspire the communities that we lived within to have these conversations on our behalf to our benefit. And this approach was kind of criticized by a lot of people who we got the impression, I guess, that would have preferred to see and hear from members of the Black community in Taiwan, and to kind of like have this experience or perceived experience of oppression kind of performed for them in certain ways. And I bring that up because I think that the idea of seeing experiences of Blackness and the ways in which people request to see experiences of Blackness is important to the work that Ms. Kiki is showing. Yeah, so I kind of want to hold on to and touch on that idea of how people feel it's appropriate to ask for Blackness or images of Blackness to be presented and performed for them. And so, yeah, on this slide, you can kind of see there's the crowd it was a large crowd. And then you can see Ali, myself, and Tariro on the stage. So that's the first avenue of what we did. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see our Buchiban kind of workshop series, which we did in a gallery context at UMF. And it was kind of like an ongoing series of experiments in that gallery context that were designed to kind of prolong the conversation, I guess you could say. And through the prolonging of the conversation, arrive at a nuance that was specific to the community that we're in and specific to the problems faced by the Black people in the community that we exist within. And I think that we also, in a lot, I mean, all of the work that we did was amazing, and we networked with amazing people, and we kind of really got to feel supported by just so many people in our community. But I think in a lot of ways, we also kind of regarded this Buchiban series as unsuccessful because of what we viewed as an unwillingness to continue to participate in the conversation after the lens that had been placed on a very specific experience of Black trauma had kind of shifted, and also a commitment to speaking about and kind of perpetuating a narrative of Black experience that was very specific and that did not allow for a deepening or a specifying of the conversation to the actual experiences and kind of presentations of Blackness that exist in the context that we're in, and that didn't foster accountability within those specific contexts. So yeah, I begin from this experience of organizing because I think that it was very interesting to experience how people request, respond to, and kind of attempt to see images of Blackness within the context of all of the, large-scale global conversations that have been happening over the past year, and also through the pandemic in various forms. So yeah, jumping off from there, I kind of just want to introduce or touch on, muse on, think about some varied frameworks for recognizing images of Blackness and how they're circulated in various contexts. So can we go to the second slide? Cool, thank you. So I kind of want to propose this question of like, what are the stakes for Black people making images of Black people? What is that process like, and what can that process mean? In Muskiki's work, there's the focus on, imperialist, neo-imperialist beauty standards and the ways in which, through technology and through capitalism, Black people are being made subject to these terms. And I think that that's a super important issue and question and way of looking at the distribution of images of Black people. And I think it feeds into some of the other things that I'm going to discuss today. So I guess maybe I'll jump into some of these pictures, or I guess, so like historically for Black people, and I guess I should also preface that I am speaking from my own context, which is the context of living in Taipei, but also being of African-American background and Black British background. And I know that a lot of the work that is referenced in Muskiki's artwork is in the African context, which is a context that I don't have a personal relationship with and can't comment on personally. And we have to remember and keep in mind that those experiences are diverse and varied, but also overlapping. So historically for Black people, the creation of images of themselves has always played a role in historical struggles for abolition, historical struggles for civil rights, as well as the ongoing task of kind of like negotiating white supremacist legal systems, justice systems, but also the social infrastructures that are kind of produced by and elaborated on and that expand out of all of these various systems that we're placed within. Hold on. So yeah, a couple of photos here. In the center, we have Frederick Douglass, who I think is like an interesting starting point for discussing this. At one point in history, he was the most photographed person in America. And this was because during his struggle for abolition, he used the photograph as kind of like a means for controlling, I guess, perceptions of the image of Black people. And I think that this this impulse within Black image making is something that we still see in the present, in the contemporary. So then we have this image of Mamie Till, who's the mother of Emmett Till, who was brutally murdered by a gang of white people, and who made the decision to have the corpse of her son be kind of publicly viewable to kind of expose the horrors of anti-Black racism at the time and the violence of anti-Black racism at the time. And also in the process kind of make comment on how images of Black people were kind of central to liberation and the ability to be understood. So then to kind of like bring it forward to the present, in the corner, we have this image of Darnell Fraser, who was the teenager who was responsible for capturing the murder of George Floyd on video, and for whom we have to thank that a conviction was possible, really. And I think that this is important because she's spoken really vocally about how the fallout of making this image, and thus the process of making this image, was like an intensely traumatic experience, and the ways in which she faced backlash for making this image. And I think that this idea of trauma in the making and the sharing of the image of Blackness based on how people respond to them is like a really important idea in discussing Black image making and the circulation of Blackness globally. So some ideas that I've been drawing on in thinking about this are the ideas of Black witnessing and surveillance. So I guess if you think about it relative to surveillance, which is like enacted by the state, enacted by authority, or enacted from positions of power, so it's like viewing from above, we can think of surveillance as viewing from below, or creating testimony about social structures from below, from a position with less or reduced power. And I think that this is a really interesting idea, because I think that in a lot of ways, even outside of direct responses to state-sanctioned violence, police brutality, I think that there is this element of surveillance in most, if not all, images that Black people are able to create of themselves. So it's like an inherent aspect of Black image making, because these kind of social dynamics that we're subject to are an inherent aspect of all of the kind of circumstances that can feature in an image. So this definition of surveillance I have here, I've borrowed from the work of Alyssa V. Richardson. And there are some other examples that I guess I was kind of thinking to include. I don't know how many people who are watching are familiar with kind of the Black internet, but recently there has been this kind of video compilation going around of like Black people attempting to take pictures of themselves or create videos of themselves, create streams, TikToks, whatever, of themselves, and always having this kind of like looming presence in the background of white people who are trying to engage with what they're doing or surveil what they're doing, or somehow kind of like project judgment on what they're doing or control onto what they're doing through their presence or their ability to invade the image. And I think that this is really interesting because it kind of speaks to the way that even what we might call casual image making or, casual image making is always and kind of inherently inflected by the dynamics that kind of like underpin Black experience in society. So slide 3, please. Thank you. So yeah, I think that moving on from that and also kind of circling back to what I said during the first slide about how do people ask to see images of Blackness, and how are people willing to receive images or discourse about Blackness? I kind of want to return to the question of our own, and I guess like in terms of Maskiki's work, this is interesting too, because it's like this process of teaching, algorithmically teaching a camera to recognize Blackness. I think that it's also important to raise the question of our own capacity to recognize the Blackness and the images of Blackness and the kind of testimony about Black experience that is pervasive in our daily lives. And so kind of in order to approach that question, we have to ask the question of how are images of Blackness used and circulated, and what are the ramifications of that use and circulation for Black people. So I guess in order to do that, I wanted to talk about just a couple of concepts. So digital blackface. So yeah, I guess I also have to thank Maskiki for giving us the additional context on this meme, this image that I have here. I had been looking for an image more like the one that he showed us earlier today, but I guess I don't have the language ability to kind of key into the search terms that I needed to find it. But I have like an ambient awareness that this image has taken on a certain like gravitas within, I guess, Mandarin speaking like image culture. So it was interesting and kind of like very interesting to have the context on how that's actually used. But so I look at digital blackface as kind of the adoption of Blackness to express affect, so emotions or opinions in an online context, you know, so like using Black expression as a shorthand for other feelings that are experienced by non-Black people. Or, as the case may be, kind of like approximations of feelings that are experienced by brands and corporations in order to try and sell things to people. And I think that, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think that there's a lot of irony in the fact that Black people's expressions and bodies and cultures are being kind of like borrowed or taken in order to express emotion, when also we experience this kind of intense unwillingness to engage with the feelings or the testimony that Black people are actually trying to express themselves. But yeah, so I think that the idea of digital Blackness is one interesting framework for kind of looking at and recognizing when images of Blackness and Black culture are being circulated around us. I also want to talk about kind of like cultural appropriation, which is kind of it's a term that is used a lot in various ways and in various contexts, but I think that it does have merit here to talk about the ways in which Black cultures are kind of, especially in the digital age, kind of like emancipated from Black people and then used for other purposes, or used to kind of like garner opportunities to create profit, or to enter into discourse that Black people are not themselves privy to because of a reduced amount of mobility because of the social circumstances that Black people are often subject to. So on this slide, I had just had some images that I have taken from various places on the internet of different instances that I would call appropriative or so on, I guess. Yeah, so I think kind of yeah, so I guess one of the ways that I have been looking at the kind of confluence of all of these frameworks for understanding images of Blackness for myself is this idea of the social elaboration of Blackness. So this kind of phenomena in which we see Blackness kind of like adopted, stripped of Black people, and then kind of like elaborated socially, but then in a way that is reflectively projected back onto Black people and limits the way, or kind of inflects the way, or creates expectations for the way in which we can be understood, but also the ways in which we can express ourselves. And I think that this is one of the real kind of like social consequences that we see of the way that we share images of Blackness, because images of Blackness are around us all the time. We see it in advertising, we see it in music, we see it in popular culture, in entertainment, in art, in queer culture, in just all kinds of avenues of kind of social production. So yeah, the way in which it kind of creates and limits the expectations for how Black people themselves are then able to engage is an important part of this conversation, I think. So yeah, I think that I'm just going to kind of like return to the original question of how, similar to these algorithms, I guess, that work in these cameras, how can we also train ourselves to recognize images of Blackness that exist around us, but accept them on the terms of the people to whom they are indebted. So accept them on the terms of Black people and engage with them in order to foster kind of like positive social engagement for Black people. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it with that kind of provocation, and we can come back in question time or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you for what you're sharing. And yeah, it's really interesting to learn about this concept of surveillance. And I think this is something that we need to talk a little bit more about, because surveillance now, it's usually, this is kind of like me in the center and then looking out, like my prisoners, that kind of concepts, or something that's being imposed by algorithm or the digital eye or the computer vision. And yet surveillance is something that's like a very different ideas that you brought up. I think it's really interesting to see how that can be also used as another kind of force to challenge the authority, which comes back to what Ms. Kiki was sharing earlier about the book Anti-Fragile. I also been planning on reading this, but it's really big book. So maybe we can have a book club later. I can't wait to start. Yeah, thank you again, Christopher. I wanted to introduce our last but not least speaker, Liu Wen. Been looking forward to this for a very long time, and really eager to hear what you been thinking and what's your thoughts on the exhibition and the artworks. Welcome, Liu Wen.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Yen Yi. Thank you, MoCA and Ms. Kiki. Also, Cheng-An for doing the tech work, and obviously Christopher's comments, which helped me think a lot about how we can sort of, through Ms. Kiki's work, understand Taiwan's particular place in understand global anti-Blackness, and perhaps what can we do as folks from Taiwan. So right now I'm trained as a social psychologist. I write book, film reviews. I also see myself as a scholar activist, work on various issues, including racial justice and LGBTQ rights. And my main research work is around Asian American studies and racial studies, and particularly around this idea of Afro-Asian solidarity, right? The obstacles and possibility of that kind of coalition. So I was actually quite interested in what Ms. Kiki brought up earlier, right? In a lot of image he shows around Bruce Lee's work, right? He was actually quite inspired by Black politics in a way. And if we think about the context that he was in, I mean, he sort of grew up in San Francisco, California. And in fact, during the times of 1960s and 1970s, there was a way of sort of Afro-Asian politics, right? Particularly in the West Coast. And the birth of Asian American movements at that time was very specifically inspired by Black liberation movements. So there was a lot of imageries around sort of yellow power, or the idea of Asian American as a politicized concept, actually, very specifically drawn from ideas of Black Panthers. And Black Panthers was also very much inspired by Mao Zedong's call for Afro-Asian solidarity. So in the 1960s and 70s, there was that kind of really internationalist idea of that Black people and Asian people, together becoming this kind of anti-imperialist bloc. So I think that can kind of explain why we see sort of yellow and Black in some of these historical imageries. And when Ms. Kiki was talking about his work, I was also thinking about how, right, he said that it was actually hard to translate Blackness in Mandarin. I thought that was really interesting because I never thought about it very carefully. When we think about it, all the translation in Mandarin, it could be derogatory, right? It sounds negative, or oftentimes it's this incomplete ideas of Blackness. Because we have to understand Blackness, obviously, is a concept that continues to evolve, right? Even in contemporary Black politics, right? It was, as I talked about in the 1960s, it was thought as a very sort of radical internationalist politics. And also with the movement of Black feminism in the 1970s, it was also started to be seen as an aesthetics, right? An aesthetics that's trying to intervene in the sort of mainstream version of white femininity. So there's a lot. So Blackness as a politics, Blackness as a kind of aesthetics, the claim that, right, Black is beautiful. That was also around sort of the feminist movement time. And also the idea that Blackness as a standpoint theory, right, that, Black feminists argue that we should produce knowledge and produce theoretical ideas really from the standpoint of Black women's lives. So there's a lot of different ways we can think about Blackness, but without those contexts, particularly in the Mandarin context or in the Sinophone context, we kind of, erase all those sort of really rich historical ideas. And oftentimes, right, we think of it as a kind of just a color, right, or associated with a particular race, but it's actually, much, much more. So I was thinking about this Black feminist Evelyn Hammond's idea that she talked about how Black female sexuality is often functioned as a black hole, right? Like 黑洞, that it absorbs all the things that reflecting from whiteness, that's never been seen wholly or entirely. And oftentimes we only see the partial imageries of Black female sexuality that's, hypersexual, that's often perverse and whatnot. But the argument she made, I think, was really interesting. I think really inspired also, very connected to Ms. Kiki's work here, that he said the point is really not about representation, right? The point is not we should just make a lot more imageries of Blackness, but is that we have to change the structures in which Blackness is being seen or is being reflected, right? So that we can actually, kind of reframe the whole, systematic inequality in how Blackness is seen. So I really like that idea, and I wanted to start there to think about, I guess, to reflect on Ms. Kiki's work today. So next slide, please. So I think the main idea we want to share with you all and discuss with you all today is that cultural anti-Blackness, obviously, it's global. It's not just something that's just funny that we can dismiss it. It's actually supported by historical and material structure that's very much alive today, and in which Taiwan is embedded in, right? So Taiwanese people, we hear this sort of racial critiques that, oh, you're racist, oh, that image is racist. We tend to think, well, it's just harmless, right? It's something I didn't even think that much about. That's usually the kind of defense, right, the Taiwanese people have. Well, there's no racism in Taiwan, right? We hear that a lot, but I think it's important to understand how, despite we might not have this, unlike the US, we don't have an official history of anti-Black racism. We're very much alive in the role of co-producing global structure of anti-Blackness. So, I mean, this imagery I want to show, obviously, I think it's one way in which a lot of people today, are thinking about racial discourses. This is coming from around April last year by the WHO 世界卫生组织 director Tedros Tangsai, and he made these comments, out of the blue, and say that he has received a lot of racist attacks from Taiwanese netizens, and these attacks came from Taiwan. So that was a sort of internet campaign that really inspired a lot of the resistance from Taiwanese people. Even the government official like President Tsai Ing-wen and our sort of a Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued statements against the accusations. And it was found out later that these racial attacks were actually coming from Chinese trolls. But I thought it was a really good opportunity to think about, even though Taiwan does not think it's included in a global racial discourse, we're always implicated in it. And I think our best defense is not to say, this is just wrong, or Taiwan is not racist, we don't have a problem with racism, but to really reflect on what kinds of practices and what kinds of structure that we kind of leave it like, a harmless joke, right? We don't challenge it systematically, right? So I think the best way we can think about it is to think about the way in which race is reproduced in Taiwan, right? Through different degrees of anti-Blackness. So I often talk about it, to think about our own policies around, racial stratification, right? Around migrant workers issue, around these issues of two class standards between foreign workers in Taiwan. I mean, that's one way, right? We can also think about it. So the point is that that Taiwan is really never outside, but implicated in the global racial discourse. And also, very importantly, I think we hear this term recently a lot, right? The idea of this emergent new Cold War. And so thinking about, we obviously, Taiwan sees itself as a very critical, right, in the process of the US and China geopolitical competition. And obviously, different folks will take different sides, but we can see how the imperial struggles between these two empires are all projecting themselves as sort of Black-friendly nation, right? US is seeing itself as a multicultural exemplar, right? While obviously the Black Lives Matter movement in the past 10 years has been really trying to challenge that, right? That the idea of racial equality is factual in the US. Obviously, we see all this brutal violence of police killing unarmed Black folks, right? And also from China is blaming the US for its racial problem, often sort of raising the idea of Black Lives Matter to say how, well, US is not as good as it say it is, right? It's not suitable to be a global leader. So we hear this challenge a lot from the Beijing leaders, like, people like Hua Chunying, etc. They always use this term to challenge sort of US domination. But at the same time, they're using this way to kind of erase their own racial problems, right? The problem of police brutality in Hong Kong, which I think a lot of them saw, white supremacy and white racial structure, right? If we think about all these problems as embedded in a global structure of white racial supremacy, then we can understand no country can actually be left out, right, in the discourses. So, and we can also think about, right, Taiwan, or the official name of Republic of China. We used to have a lot of diplomatic partners in the African continent, but obviously because of China's pressure, now we're left with only one diplomatic partner, right? So I mean, but this is not the way in which I think this is the chance for us to think about how do we build genuine and sustainable relationship that's kind of a challenge global anti-Blackness through the way that Taiwan is already, the kind of network and social network that Taiwan is embedded in, rather than saying that, well, we don't have a problem of racism. Or even thinking about recently, because of Hong Kong protester who came to Taiwan, there's this idea of the refugee bill, right? But Taiwan actually has, many refugees seeking political asylum from places like Uganda, right? But our mainstream media never really try to think about those issues, but it's actually part of it and very much of our contemporary politics. So how is these things reproduced? Obviously, I think, Taiwan being strapped around these two empires, the US and China, we're definitely in the sort of receiving side of residue effects, right, from Western white supremacy, but also our very own reproduction of Han supremacy, right, that's developing through different degrees of anti-Blackness, right, thinking about how, Han Chinese people as a more superior race compared to Southeast Asian, compared to indigenous folks, right? So those are also ideologies that we're receiving as a nation, you can say colonized by these ideas. So I think it really is a chance for us, for Taiwan, to think about how we are being implicated in part of this problem, and how Taiwan, if we want to save ourselves as a multicultural and democratic country, there's many ways we can actually do better. Okay, next slide, please. So, I mean, this is, taking from China's sort of new social security system, and using the kind of technology that Kiki talked about, right? The idea of facial recognition. And I think in Taiwan, I think, a lot of people are familiar with the system, but we often think about it as only a Chinese issue or an issue of the authoritarian state, right? I think a lot of the Western folks also have that similar ideas. Well, like China doing this is really inhuman, right? All this surveillance system, only a communist country can do that. But I think Ms. Kiki's work and his presentation is really trying to show us how there is a globally embedded system that's co-producing and making such surveillance system possible, right? So obviously China has more power to sort of execute that without, a democratic system. But we can also think about how the idea and infrastructure was also developed in the U.S. West Coast, right? Also by the Taiwanese engineers in Hsinchu. So we're all sort of, no one can sort of say, oh, this is not in our dirty hands, right? There is a globally connected way in which racialized algorithm biases is being promoted, right? And being used, through different kinds of political system. And we can also think about, so I think, yeah, so I just want to show how, right, thinking beyond the state is a problem. Racism is also obviously not a Western problem. The diaspora is very connected and sharing idea. And obviously the authoritarian leaders, different political leaders and political elites are all making profits and using similar technology, so sort of use it to benefit from their own end. So really we must think beyond just the level of the state, but thinking about how the infrastructure of empire are in fact interdependent and shared globally. So I think this panel and also Ms. Kiki's work is a way to connect us, right, beyond just the site of Taiwan, but also beyond the time of contemporary, the multicultural now, but also how a lot of these anti-Black problems, it has a historical legacy. So I'll just share it to now. Thank you.
Thank you, Liao Wen, for your awesome discourse, and it was really inspiring to hear about Asian America's movement was actually inspired by the Black Power movement. And I actually also I think during the movement of BLM, I also read an article that's from Taiwanese American Association that it kind of shows it's a manifesto that was talking about how actually a lot of Asian societies or who lives in America actually benefits from the Black social movement. So it's kind of like the discourse that they were talking about, that how the Black activists actually fought the war so that the equality was later to be possible for more different races. Yeah, it was super inspiring, and I really do hope that this talk will function as a first step, or like lay the groundwork in the bigger structure that help more Taiwanese people, and especially like these awesome elites that lives in Hsinchu, who are making the algorithm, be more careful about what they share, and also what they feed into what kind of data they feed into the algorithm they're going to create, and also the mechanism of of the selection, and also of who gets in, who gets recognized or not. This kind of mechanism needs to be more transparent, I guess, for the general public to actually to engage. Yeah, I wanted to make this panel discussion available for the audience. So I want to ask Zhiyin here to help me to facilitate the discussion part. Please speak freely, and also vice versa, Chris, when if you have different questions to each other and wanted to initiate any sort of discussion, please feel free to go ahead. Thank you, Zhiyin.
Thank you, Yen Yi, for sharing. And I just see also the sharing from Dangdai Guan. I want to remind the audience that now you are also welcome to ask any question. You can leave your comment directly in the what is it called, in Slido, or in the Facebook page. I guess you can find a place. They teach you where to leave the comment. And I will also introduce in Mandarin now, so that the audience who speak in Mandarin, they can also know where to put the comment. 想跟观众说一下，就是现在开始呢，我们会也可以接受大家问不同的问题。那我们也欢迎观众可以尽量的发问，因为我们今天有这么好的学者，还有批评家、议评者在这边。那你们可以找到可以留下问题的地方，一个叫 Slido， 或者是直接在脸书上面也可以询问。那我们这边会直接把问题留给各个讲者，那我们会尽量的来回答观众的问题。那 so here I would like to ask one question for Christopher and one question for Liu Wen, because Christopher, you are the person who really travel like between different culture, and you are so I personally grew up in Taiwan, so I really realized the problem when I was a foreign, firstly in another culture, and that really totally changed your mind of how you think about race, how you think about surrounding. And that was a point I feel this uncomfortableness of this cultural appropriation you just mentioned before. And this cultural appropriation is really problematic. And 99% whoever use cultural appropriation make mistake. And for artists or for like image creator like us, appropriation is always been a way, not only visual art, but also literature or theater. Appropriation has been always a technique for different creativities. But when this cultural appropriation shift to the pop culture or public culture, it suddenly become so problematic in many ways. I mean, I'm not saying the artists not making mistake. We also make mistake all the time. I also make mistake all the time. So I want you all can maybe throw some of your observation as a person who, especially as a foreign who moved to Taipei and also experience all this cultural appropriation. Why we need cultural appropriation, and why people always like use this as a technique to generate some kind of attention or humor, and how can we deal with cultural appropriation? That's my first question. And also for Liu Wen, I also have a second question, which is, you just mentioned many cases that Taiwan has actually a lot of experience, and not a lot, but was a lot of discussion generated till now about like migrant workers, and also gender, not enough, but still keep coming, and also minor communities in Taiwan. But why this black, or why this ignorance appears about, especially when we talk about the blackness and black people? If we have so many discussion about all these things, why when we encounter the blackness it suddenly disappear? Is it because of political surroundings, or is that the historical reason, or is there other reason from your perspective might result in this consequence? So that's my question for you too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess I'll answer your question first. So for me, I think that like it's important to center, when talking about cultural appropriation, it's important to center the idea of capital and the kind of like distribution of capital that comes from the use of culture. So and then think about, especially in the digital age, this kind of like operation of the border, be it kind of like borders between states or kind of like borders that exist within the social infrastructures that we exist in together, that kind of like separates people from their culture, kind of like in order to facilitate profit. So I think that kind of like one of the problems that we face with cultural appropriation is this idea that certain cultures, certain Black cultures, or certain kind of like productions of Blackness are being separated from Black people, in the process marginalizing them and reducing their mobility, their social mobility, and their physical mobility, and then creating profit that is not being used to help emancipate marginalized people from the systems or the structures that marginalize them. And I think that this is important to hold on to, because I think that often when we talk about cultural appropriation, or when ideas of cultural appropriation are criticized, it's in the name of this idea of cultural exchange, which I think holds on to the premise that of like a neutrality in people's opportunities to engage with and benefit from culture that I don't think exists or is possible. So I think that it's really important to hold on to those ideas when we discuss cultural appropriation.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for your question. And I think I heard the first part. So it's around how Taiwan, we have a lot of discussion around probably gender diversity. We also talk about migrant issue, but why is it around Blackness or around race? We kind of don't know what to do, right? And I'm still thinking about this question. I just moved back to Taiwan last year and really noticed that as well. And I think, Taiwan's ideas of multiculturalism is actually also not that new, right? It's around the 1990s, we had this idea of new Taiwanese identity, right, by President Li Denghui, 新台湾人论述, right? And also, from the president afterwards, we have this idea that Taiwanese-ness is not one ethnicity. There is Minnan, there's Kejia, right? There's mainland Chinese folk. There's also indigenous folk. So we kind of developed our ideas of diversity and multicultural identity from that way. But really, when we look at under the framework of Republic of China, right, 中华民国, when they established the country in China, currently the PRC, it's really founded upon this idea of the one race, right, 中华民族 as one dominant race, and all the sort of ethnicity are being subsumed under this one superior race. So that also explains why when the KMT came to Taiwan, their earlier policy around how they treat indigenous folks was also horrible, right? Because there was the idea that really sort of replicating the idea of Han supremacy, Confucianism, right? That, Taiwan has this kind of continental ideas of race, rather than thinking about Taiwan itself, right? We are obviously an island country, right? That we're surrounded by all kinds of different race and ethnicity and cultures. So, I mean, right now in academic fields, there's a lot of talks on why don't Taiwan see itself as part of Southeast Asia, right? Why do we hold on to this idea that Taiwan is still part of, right, this broader continental ideas connected to, right, East Asia? Why can't we see it ourselves as more of a sort of islanded culture, islanded tradition that connected to our more of the sort of diversity path? So I think those ideas are still, very much forming in the current generation, not only I think in our politics, but also in our own sort of theoretical thinking. How do we position Taiwan? So I think that really connected to why we lack a proper framework of racial justice. But I do think it's very urgent that we have that, because obviously Taiwan, if we want to see ourselves as a global country, that obviously we have a lot of people of different race and ethnicity come to Taiwan and work and live. We need to have have some kind of discourses around global racial diversity. That's not just about white people, right? And in one way, right, Taiwan is very, very much Americanized. From the time of American soldiers in Taiwan, there were also actually African American soldiers, but we usually don't talk about that past, right? We tend to think about the global as the West and equal to white. But right now, I think we really need to reframe that. And right now, because of the diaspora, the Asian American diaspora, the Taiwanese American diaspora, you see more cultural and racial diversity now. But I mean, kind of related to your question and your discussion on cultural appropriateness. Unfortunately, there's a lot more cultural appropriation going on in the more commercialized way of thinking about Blackness. I can think about one example that's like Taiwanese American entrepreneur Eddie Huang. He was based in New York and had this bao shop, and also wrote memoir and now producing movies. And he really loves the hip hop culture, but if that is the only kind of Black cultural Blackness we see, unfortunately, that is still very much under a white frame, right? So I think that the question is, I think it's so important, and we need to dig back in our history, but also looking to who are we thinking about in terms of the global? It can't just be another sort of whitewash global culture.
And thank you so much. I think when I see I mean, all the terms you mentioned is really grew up with me in my memory when I when I grew up in Taiwan, but only until now I really beg to rethink all the things, and I also appreciate this conference helped me to review everything with you. I personally have a lot of questions I will keep asking, but it doesn't mean that I want to occupy it all the time. So please, if any of you want to ask each other or ask me or ask Yen any question, you can also just let me know. Just interrupt me. Otherwise,
can I jump in with a question?
Please.
Yeah, I have a question for you actually. I often think about kind of like the military-industrial complex and the intersections that we know that it has with police infrastructures and police brutality in the West, specifically in an American context. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts or elaboration on kind of the relationship between Taiwanese sovereignty and the US military, and how that reflects back on ways of engaging with or being implicated in struggles against police brutality in the West, but also in the region that we exist in as well, where we also see examples of kind of like similar methods of oppression.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is so important and so hard. So obviously, I think very interesting during the 2020 presidential election in the US, right? There was actually a survey coming from UK that showed that Taiwan was, a country that supported Trump the most. And when you see how the presidential election were run and also being advertised in Taiwan, that really wasn't a surprise, right? Because Taiwan does have to heavily rely on U.S. support, right, for its sovereignty. Taiwan, as its current nation formation, actually would not have existed if, the U.S. government did not aid the KMT government at that time, right? In post World War II. So this is a really complicated historical issue, but I don't think that means that Taiwanese people should not be opposing police brutality, right? Or that we should not be supporting movements like Black Lives Matter. I actually strongly encourage us, obviously, to take the geopolitical reality that we're in, that we are a very small, fragile country that has a sovereignty that's questionable, that needs international allies. So I have no question about that. But it doesn't mean that we can't work more closely with the U.S. civil society, right? So there's a lot of talks around we should work more, with the diplomats and all that. I mean, I think that's good, but from the standard of the civil society, when there is a global movement around racial justice, I mean, why can't Taiwan also be part of that? Why isn't that being seen as a way moving Taiwanese sovereignty forward? I mean, me personally, I think sometimes those movements and the connection built in the grassroots can be more genuine and powerful than being close to just one diplomat, right? So I think from my own activist standard, I always advocate to work more. I mean, obviously the US is such a diverse country. There's so many different politics. There are very diverse kinds of people. So to be close to the US doesn't, right, to be pro-US doesn't mean that being pro-Trump, right? To me, we shouldn't take that binary stance. But very unfortunately, during election time, because of this, I think, sense of insecurity and urgency, a lot of Taiwanese people, during the presidential election of 2020, we see a lot of, you can say, pathologizing, negative imageries around BLM. You see a lot of political talk shows that portray the movement as just simply violent. So that, that's connected to a lot of issues. I mean, obviously, the issues around geopolitics, the issue of the lack of understanding of why people are fighting for that. But I think there's a lot of work to be done myself, right, to understand actually a lot of the movements within Taiwanese local history, if we say the 228 incident, that was also a case around police brutality, right? So I think Taiwanese people, if we really want to think about a more sustainable way and more sort of social justice way of thinking about sovereignty, we should be more connected to the anti-authoritarian history that we have in a country. And in that way, we can see how all these movements are connected. The movements in Hong Kong, the movements in the US led by people of color. If we don't do that, those discourses will only be appropriated by, as I say, the Beijing politician, because the CCP actually has a history of Afro-Asian solidarity, which the ROC government does not, right? So all these all play into this very complicated web of geopolitics, and I think, yeah, we need more of these work together.
Thank you, Liu Wen and Christopher. I wanted to take this chance to see if there are any other questions from the audience. Okay, I'm gonna do a small countdown from, I guess maybe because a lot of the questions that I have was also answered or was also raised by Ms. Kiki and then answered by both speakers. Yeah, I think, yeah, audience, this is really challenging for you. So get your brain working and get your questions out. Ms. Kiki, please.
I have a last question. Since we have a time limitation, I will just let's say last question. I want to ask both of you free to answer, because during our talk I keep, especially the presentation from Christopher. Can you hear me? Yeah, clear, right? Okay. From Christopher, I keep thinking about this. So the especially you show me this the photographer, the black photographer photographing a black figure. So I was thinking before I was reading, I was listening this speech from this Dr. Ruha Banjamin from Princeton University. She created a term. Ruha Banjamin created a term called New Jin Code. Not New Jin Crow, but New Jin Code, which means to describe how surveillance and how police brutality, how racialized of this technology into our daily life. So this question is for both of you, especially when Christopher just mentioned about the surveillance and the police brutality. That if, from my perspective or from my creativity works, I do see now the technology go into a dark side, a dark direction, which only make our confrontation become stronger and worse. And you can see more and more protests coming up, and then more confrontation between minorities and also police. And it's a general question. Maybe there's no answer. I would like to ask, because we can't just say we abandon the technology. We can't abandon algorithm. We can't abandon camera. So, how can we react with this? So I know this question is really big, but I just want to have this question. We don't need to answer it, but how can we react to New Jin Code? That's my question. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Do you want to answer first, or should I? Me? Okay. So I guess I understand the question to be kind of like, how can we react to emerging technologies so that they don't kind of progress towards like more insidious use. And kind of like, I guess like, so it makes me think about, so recently with the Protect Asian Lives movement, we've seen a lot of instances of the kind of like surveillance also used to kind of like rightfully call out this kind of like horrendous violence that's been enacted against Asian Americans or like diasporic Asians in the wake of the coronavirus situation. But one of the narratives that emerged from this strategy was that Black people were kind of like overwhelmingly responsible for this violence against Asian people. Until recently, when studies were released that debunked this idea and kind of proved that the overwhelming percentile majority of the attacks against people of Asian descent were carried out by people, by white people, or people who kind of like operated from relative positions of privilege to the victims of their attacks. But I think that this is really interesting because it kind of like highlights the ways in which like, just because we have these technologies available to us to kind of like potentially democratize the scope of what we see and how we're able to engage with the kind of like horrific events that happen around us, it doesn't really matter unless we're able to kind of intervene within our own conditioning of how we receive images, you know? So like in this context, like people have already overwhelmingly been conditioned to receive images of Black people as violent perpetrators. So it was extremely easy for them to slip into kind of like believing a certain narrative that was embraced and pushed by media that adopted or appropriated these testimonies created through surveillance and then kind of like used them to interject and sow the seeds of divisiveness between communities who, as we've stated today, should be kind of like working in coalition to kind of like end marginalization. So I think that that's an interesting example that kind of like speaks to the intention of your question about how we have to really kind of like use these technologies in tandem with like a deconditioning of ourselves and the way in which we allow technology to function socially before kind of they're able to reach the potential that they have for liberation or emancipation.
Yeah, I prefer also that I think it has a democracy way, right? So Netflix bias trying to should Black people and Black women to be intact. There's a lot of, you know, can be more appropriate the marginal community. Like seizing the means is one solution, and also development of social 15 years right around Arab Spring. Everyone like Facebook tool, right? Grassroots movement. They know about social media. They have academic digital media. We've actually seen Tyrian leaders manipulate the tools. You know, more against community. In a way, like the optimism has climbed, right? And Facebook related US that ecology against it. Similarly, maybe from way, you know, newer recognition thinking surveillance way, but attention to how can always develop to regain. So I feel like it's kind of, and so involved knowing the technology, all these tools active. I think that the only with last repeatable language. So I want we also see different community as this tool, like hackers, right? It's another way. See, in some elites take community risk. Hopefully, we know depths of power.
Thanks, Dylan. Do you guys hear my delay, or it's okay?
It's good.
Wow, then it's just myself. I sabotage myself. Okay. Let me just. Okay. Well, I'm just gonna briefly make a conclusion. I want to see if there are still any. I want to check if there are any questions, but I guess it's a shame because we have to end this this panel now. It's a brilliant panel that we had, and I also wanted to respond to earlier Liu Wen's response towards how this like one ethnic for all, the 中华民族, this kind of concept for that's like mostly used in China. It's actually I the other day, yesterday I was talking to a curator, Lu Monu. We were talking about how the words that Taiwan use for Aboriginal people, it's called 原住民. That means that they were born here, they came here earlier, that they were here earlier. But then like in China, it's like 少数民族, it's like a minority. And I think that's this is such a linguistic play, also implication there as well, that like to respect people who came here before you, and also the other kind of way that to make sure you know that you are the minority, that you have to like respect, or like 服从, or surrender, or even like follow the majority's opinion. I think it's really fascinating, and also we were also talking about on the context, actually talking about this panel, that why it is so strange that I feel like Stop Asian Hate. I personally find it really challenging to support this slogan, because I feel like this actually reinforced the idea of Asian hate. People who didn't understand, who probably already doing this kind of racial discrimination action, that didn't have a word for such action. Now they have this word called Asian hate. And I don't think this is helpful for the situation that we are having now. And this is just my personal opinion. In other words, I feel like Black Lives Matter is it sends out such a clear message. And also earlier I listened to Christopher that mentioned this movement called Protect Asian movement, and I feel like at the times of naming, it's also really important. And I feel like sometimes maybe at the beginning you wanted to portray certain ideas to stop something, but at the same time kind of reinforce this idea of Asian hate. So this is what I felt it's difficult to subscribe to support this this name only, but I do support the movement that we should have a more safe, and also everyone should be safe, and in the society, and also in the global context, and also for people to function anywhere. Yeah, so I was wondering if Muskiki have any remarks here. No? And Liu-Wen or Christopher, do you have any, any remarks here? Okay, then. So thanks everyone to join us for this panel. I'm sure that we're going to receive a lot of different invitation in the future, since MoCA is a great platform for many art lovers and cultural studies scholars. And so again, I wanted to thank you all for joining us for this wonderful 2 hours, spending this afternoon with us. So informative. I've learned so much, and I also I feel like my eye was opened, and I wanted to keep digging, and also wanted to build different groundwork for more people that to be able to joining our discussion and to develop this idea about Blackness and also multiculturalism. And we wanted to be a society that creates a kind of social contract that everyone respects each other, and also being able to understand and also trusting each other. We wanted to create a trustworthy society where people can function and also be free, and also to create and to help people and to form a community. And sadly, I feel like that has been challenged by certain political figures, or some really weird escalated emotions that that just like moving around on the internet. So I think this is the time now that we people like us or you, we should really take this chance to understand when attack comes. We should learn to anti-fragile. We should develop a stronger muscle and use the force, and to make it another counterattack. So that's a response to Skiki's exhibition. I wanted to urge everyone, if you are free, make your reservation and go to MoCA to visit the show. And if you have missed the talk, we will discuss if there will be possibility that to keep this talk video online for a general public to see. Otherwise, you should just follow us on, I don't know, like on our websites, and keep looking out for panels like this, so that we can all connect and also create more discussion. And thank you Liu-Wen, thank you Christopher, and thank you Muskiki Jing. It's wonderful to spend this afternoon with you, and I hope you all to have a lovely evening and lovely morning, or an afternoon and evening for you, Christopher. And I will see you in Taiwan. Bye-bye. Thank you. And thanks for MoCA. Thank you, MoCA. Thanks for Chen An. Thank you for all your help.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.